Hello to those of you who are joining us for this pre-departure webinar. We're going to be beginning in just a moment. We're going to allow some more folks to filter in, so sit tight, and our presentation will begin shortly. Hello, and thank you for joining us today for this pre-departure webinar about your upcoming tour, a week in Greece, Athens, Mykonos, and Santorini. My name is Nilsson. I work for Go Ahead Tours as a member of our community and engagement team. I'm based out of the Boston area, and I'm really excited to be your host for this webinar. And I'm also very excited to introduce you to one of our tour directors in Greece. He's done this tour many times, and I'm very excited for you to benefit from his expertise. Kostas, can I ask you to introduce yourself to our guests today?
Kalispera, everyone. Good evening. I'm Kostas. I've been working for EF Go Ahead for 25 years, which is a very, very long time. But I still enjoy it very, very much. And I think this year, it's the year I'm the most excited I've ever been, because it's the year that hopefully things go back to normal and everyone will have a chance to return to traveling. So I'm really, really happy to do this webinar. And I'm really happy to talk about Greece and to see you when you come here.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm really, really excited to talk about this incredible itinerary. So let's talk about our agenda for this meeting. So to begin with, I am going to talk to you about some practical information related to COVID-19. I'll talk to you about our safe traveler agreement. I'll talk to you about entry requirements, so what's required of you before you arrive to tour. Now, bear in mind that the folks that are joining us on this webinar today are scheduled to travel in the summer. So we'll talk about what's true as of today, but also how to stay up to date on this information as you get closer to your tour. Then we'll talk a little bit about some expectations around safety on tour, as well as exit requirements, which is what we call that test that you may need to get in order to fly home. So we'll talk about that and how we'll help you to get that achieved. After that, we're going to transition to talking about the itinerary itself. And I'm going to ask Kostas to come in and give us an overview of the highlights of this itinerary. And following that, we'll talk about some other helpful tips. We'll talk about things like weather, packing, money. And then at the end of the presentation, we will have some time for your questions. Now, as I mentioned, we have folks that are traveling throughout the summer on this call today. And so we will try to make sure that we're giving answers that are going to be relevant to all of you, but we do welcome your questions. So if you do have questions for us, you can submit them using the Q&A box on the toolbar in Zoom. So I do have some folks that are going to be monitoring that inbox and may be responding to you directly, but Kostas and I will be trying to answer some of those questions throughout the presentation and of course, during the Q&A period at the end as well. So with that, let's jump right in and talk first about our Safe Traveler Agreement. So the Safe Traveler Agreement is a document that we have created that outlines our approach to travel at this time. And it lets you know what we expect from you, our travelers, as well as what you can expect from us, as well as the other folks in your group. So the Safe Traveler Agreement is available on our website. You can read up on it there. It will also be in your online account and in the Go Ahead mobile app starting about 45 days prior to your departure. So we do ask that you log into your online account or into the Go Ahead mobile app, read through the Safe Traveler Agreement, and then agree to it before you travel with us. So with that, let's talk a little bit about entry requirements and what will be required of you to begin your tour. So first, I'm going to talk to you about some things that Go Ahead Tours asks of you, and then we'll also talk about what is required to enter Greece, and then how to stay up to date on that information as you get closer to your tour. So To begin with, the first thing that you are going to need for this trip is your passport. If you haven't traveled in a while, you want to make sure that you know where that is and that it is up to date. A good rule of thumb is that you want your passport to be valid for at least 6 months beyond your scheduled return date. So make sure your passport has 6 months validity beyond your scheduled return date, and that there's room in there for stamps. Go Ahead Tours does ask that our travelers be fully vaccinated and that you have a negative test result before you join your tour group. So as far as testing, we ask that you have either a PCR or an antigen test prior to your departure. So if you're getting your PCR or antigen test done by a third party, we ask that you do that within 72 hours of your departure. We've also updated our guidelines to allow for home testing to give some added flexibility. If you're going to use a home test, we ask that you do so within 24 hours of your departure, and we ask that you take a photo of that test result and bring that with you to tour. So those are some things that Go Ahead Tours is asking of our travelers. What I want to talk to you about now is how to find the entry requirements. So what would be required of you to enter Greece? And also, if you're doing the extension, what would be required of you to enter Italy as well? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to find this information in 2 different places. First, I'll talk about the app. So if you don't have the Go Ahead Tours app, I do recommend that you download that. And then you can also find this information in your online account on the Go Ahead Tours website. So first I'll show you the app, and then I will take you to the Go Ahead website to show you what it looks like there. So to begin with, let's talk about using the Go Ahead Tours app. So if you do have the app and you're looking for your entry requirements, what you're going to do is open the app and look at the bottom toolbar, and you'll see an option there marked Tours. And when you click on Tours, it will bring up the tours that you are scheduled on in the future. And we see in screen number 2 here, there'll then be a scrolling menu. So you'll scroll down that menu until you reach the Getting Ready tab. So the Getting Ready tab is going to be where all of the information you need before your tour lives. So you'll have information about packing, about money, and all the rest. But at the top of that page, there is a blue box above everything else that will prompt you to click on it to find your entry requirements. And when you do that, it'll then list all of the information you need for your arrival and your time in Greece. So again, if you're using the Go Ahead Tours app, you'll click on Tours, select your upcoming trip to Greece, and then scroll down to Getting Ready. In the Getting Ready tab, that is where you're going to find all of the information about your entry requirements for this tour. So with that, I also want to show you how to find this information on our website. And I'm also going to talk to you about what current requirements are in Greece. Now, before we do that, I do want to remind you that these regulations are true as of today, but these things can change, and I expect that they may between now and when you're scheduled to travel this summer. So let's go to the Go Ahead website and we can look at this together. So when you go, you can find this information again in your online account on the Go Ahead website. If you are on the Go Ahead website, you can also go to the search bar here and type in travel requirements or entry requirements, and it will bring you to this page. Let's type in Greece, and we want to make sure that we are selecting the right tour. So a week in Greece, Athens, Mykonos, and Santorini. Now, I do want to call attention to a few things at the top of the page here. So I was mentioning at the beginning of the presentation, the Safe Traveler Agreement, and here is the link to the full text of that. So you can click on that and read through the Safe Traveler Agreement by going through it on this page. A few highlights from the Safe Traveler Agreement: masks will be required in some locations. We do ask that you have a negative COVID-19 test before you join the group, and we do ask that you be vaccinated before traveling on tour. Another thing that I do want to call your attention to is that if you are doing the extension to Rome, please click this here so that then we'll include some information about Italy as well. So let's scroll down and look at some of the information relating to entering Greece. Now, here we can see that you can mandatory proof of vaccination. So if you are fully vaccinated, you don't have to show a negative COVID-19 test result as a condition of entry to Greece. But I do want to be clear about what the requirements are for proof of vaccination and what it means to be considered fully vaccinated. So here we'll say fully vaccinated travelers from selected countries must have proof of vaccination showing they received their last required dose at least 14 days before travel. Now, this is really important. Proof of vaccination is valid for 9 months after the completion of the basic vaccination regimen. and without a time limit for those who have received a booster dose. So if you received your original vaccine series more than 9 months prior to your entry to Greece, you would have to have a booster shot in order to be considered fully vaccinated for the purpose of your entry to Greece. So that's something important. Now, another thing that I do want to make sure that you are aware of is that when you scroll down here, we can see this. Different requirements apply for domestic health measures to access public spaces such as tourist accommodations, restaurants, and live events. Proof of vaccination for domestic health measures is valid for 7 months after the completion of the basic vaccine regimen and without a time limit for those who have received a booster dose. So this is a little bit complicated, but I want to be clear here. In order to enter Greece, it is required that you either have a booster shot or that you have received your primary vaccine series within the previous 9 months. But then once you're in Greece and you're trying to go out to a restaurant, for example, or access other sites like museums, things like that, it would be required that you have either received your primary vaccine series within the previous 7 months or you had a booster dose at any time. So that is something to bear in mind. And so honestly, if you haven't had a booster shot, I would recommend that you do so to have the greatest ease of access and entry to everything that you want to see when you are visiting Greece. So some other things that I do want to call your attention to, if you look at this field here, it says a COVID-19 test may be required on arrival. This is really just notifying you that the authorities reserve the right to ask random travelers as they arrive to take a COVID-19 test. So that's something that isn't going to be required of everyone. It's just something that they do want to make you aware of. The other thing I want to call your attention to is that as of right now, masks are mandatory in indoor public spaces. So I would plan to bring masks with you, and so that is something that I would plan to do. Now, for those of you that are traveling on the extension to Rome, you can also find information here. Very similar situation with the proof of vaccination. If you are fully vaccinated, you don't have to show a test result to enter Italy, but again, they, for the purpose of entry, they ask that you have you received your primary vaccine series within the previous 9 months or have a booster shot. But then again, once you're in the country, it's even stricter. So as we see here, it says stricter rules around proof of vaccination may apply for the country's health pass. Be sure to read all regulations for a full understanding of vaccine requirements for Italy. So when you are in Italy to access things like restaurants, and specifically to go to, the Vatican is one example, you would need to either have your booster shot or have received your primary vaccine series within the previous 6 months. So some very helpful information that you can find here when reading up on information about proof of vaccination to enter Italy. And then, of course, reading about the health pass. Now, just for your knowledge, if you're reading things about needing a health pass, for our American travelers, that would be your CDC card. That'll serve as the equivalent of that health pass. And for our Canadian travelers, to show your original vaccine certificate as well. One last thing that I do want to call your attention to for those of you that are going to Italy is that there's a specific type of mask that is asked for in certain locations. So the FFP2 or the KN95 mask, that's required in all forms of public transportation and then in other venues. So for example, my understanding is entering the Vatican, you would need one of these type of masks. So as you're packing your mask for this tour, I recommend bringing KN95 or FFP2 masks. So with that, I do want to return to our slideshow and talk to you a little bit more about safety on tour. But again, as you get closer to your tour, you can continue to check our website for information about entry requirements, because one thing we have seen over time is that these regulations can change, and they very well may change between now and when you are scheduled to travel. So when you are on tour with us, one thing that I think is always appreciated is flexibility. Now, this has always been important when you're traveling with a group, because things can change. We have to make adjustments here and there, but it's even more important now. So for example, if capacity restrictions were to change, we can make adjustments on the fly, but we do appreciate your flexibility. As far as testing on tour and proof of vaccination, let's talk about testing first. So at this time, my expectation is that you will have to take a test in order before you travel, because Go Ahead Tours does ask that of our travelers. But as it stands right now, provided you meet all of vaccination requirements, the only other test I would expect that you would have to take is if you have to take a test to return home. So as it stands right now, our American travelers do have to take a test to return home. Our Canadian travelers don't have to do that as of now. But again, my expectation is that you would have to take a test before you arrive to tour and then once before you fly home. But if there were another test required of you during your time on tour, we would be there to handle all of the logistics of arranging that. As far as proof of vaccination, when you arrive in Greece, again, if you can prove your vaccination status, you don't have to show the proof of a negative test result. And as of right now, I would expect that you would have to show proof of vaccination for certain activities like going out to restaurants or entering museums, things like that. So I would expect that you would have to show proof of vaccination throughout your tour as regulations stand right now. Now, as I mentioned, local regulations can change and these things can be somewhat fluid. But one of the great things about traveling with Go Ahead is you have a tour director who is there with you to help you navigate these things. So if you're on tour and you're not sure if it's a time where you could take a mask break or if you should be wearing your mask, your tour director will be able to help guide you there. We have been working with our partners to have enhanced cleaning protocols. So when you are on tour, I do expect that you may see some enhanced cleaning in places like hotel common areas and things like that. So we do hope that you will see some of that while you are traveling. In addition to that, I do want to talk to you about some support that we offer to you as our travelers. So another benefit of traveling with Go Ahead is that you have a team that is available 24 hours a day. This is our on-tour support team, and you can reach them by phone 24 hours a day. The most common reason that people call them is because of flight delays, which can happen. And if that does happen, please do let us know so we can make your arrival to tour as smooth as possible. The last thing I want to talk about on this slide is your expert tour director. Now, your tour director is there with you throughout your tour, and they are committed to giving you the best possible experience. Kostas has been mentioning he's been with us for 25 years, and so he has heard all of the questions that you may have, and so don't be shy with your tour director. They're really there to give you the best experience. So all questions, great and small, you can bring them to your tour director and they will do their best to assist you. So that is a really wonderful benefit of traveling with Go Ahead is you have these folks that are there with you. They're committed to giving you the best possible experience and they will do their best with whatever questions you may bring their way. Now, before we move on from this section, I do want to answer a question that we get very frequently by email and also throughout our presentations, which is what happens if I am required to quarantine on tour, which is a good question because this is, part of this new travel landscape. But I want to give you some reassurance that if you are on tour with us and you are required to quarantine, we will have your back. We call this our EF COVID Care Promise. And this is a promise to you that if you are on tour with us and you are required to quarantine, we will step in and we will arrange and pay for your hotel. We will arrange and pay for all of your meals. We will also provide translation services for you. If necessary, we'll communicate with local authorities and medical professionals on your behalf. And lastly, if you have purchased your flight package with Go Ahead Tours, we will arrange to get you home once your quarantine has ended at no additional expense to you. So I hope that that gives you some additional peace of mind as you're getting ready to travel. Now, I do want to talk about testing to return home. This is another frequently asked question. So if you are required to have a negative test result to fly home, which is the case currently for all of our travelers in the United States, we will help you to arrange testing before you fly home. We've been doing this for a number of months now, and what we try to do is we try to bring someone to your hotel to conduct these tests for you the day before you depart. So we will arrange all of the logistics of having these tests done, but we do ask that you pay for the test. My expectation is that for those leaving from Greece, your tests will cost approximately 30 euros per person. In Italy, I would expect approximately the same price range, so around 25 to 30 euros per person for those that are going to be flying home from Italy. So I want to take a look here and see if we had any questions submitted. Let's take a look here. So, one question, can you go over the health pass? Yes, absolutely. So when you're reading these documents where it's talking about needing to have a health pass, For our American travelers, essentially, you would be asked to show your CDC card, so your proof of vaccination. So for our travelers from North America, you're not eligible to get the European Green Pass. So you would show your original COVID-19 vaccine certificate in lieu of another health pass. So really, when you see health pass, read that as vaccine certificate. There's another question here about and contact tracing. So for those of you that are just traveling to Greece, as it stands now, you don't have to fill out a passenger locator form prior to your arrival. If you are proceeding on to Italy, there is a form that will be asked of you to fill out, which is the passenger locator form. And that would they ask that you fill that out online prior to your arrival. So that is something that you can get linked to through that same page that I showed you on the Go Ahead website or through the Go Ahead Tours app. All right. And so one question here, go over quarantine again, please, if we have to. So very happy to talk about that. If you are required to quarantine when you're on tour with us, we have what we call the EF COVID Care Promise. And this is a promise to you that if you are required to quarantine, we will arrange and pay for your hotel as well as all of your meals. We'll provide translation services for you and communicate with local authorities and medical professionals on your behalf. And if you purchased your flight package with us, we will arrange to get you home once your quarantine has ended at no additional expense to you. All right, let's see. So here is a question about for people, multiple people have asked if they can bring their own home test to do the test for the return flight to the United States. And what I would say about that is we have arranged these tests for you to make things easy for you. So if you wish, you may bring your own home test, but as I understand it, the requirement is that you would have to take those as part of a monitored or a proctored telemedicine visit in order to have documentation for your flight home. So as I understand it, home tests can be used if it's part of a telemedicine visit to get documentation to then return home. But you know, we are arranging this opportunity for you to get tests done to make things easier for you. So you can simplify things and just do it with us, and we'll be handling all of the logistics there, and you don't have to worry about handling that. All right, so let's take a look. I see another question about can you take the home test to return to the US? Again, in certain circumstances, you can if you do it as part of a telemedicine visit, but if you want, we can arrange a testing opportunity for you. Oh, great question. So is the EF COVID Care Promise based on purchasing Go Ahead insurance? The answer to that is no. This is available to all of our travelers. So if you are traveling with Go Ahead Tours and you're required to quarantine on tour, we will step in and have your back under that policy that we call the EF COVID Care Promise. All right, so here is a question. If you are not boosted, where can we get COVID tests while in Greece is needed every 72 hours? So again, one thing that I would say here is that your travels will be considerably easier if you do have a booster shot, because there are certain sites that you may not be able to access without frequent testing, and that testing may not always be available. If you are able to find that testing, that is something that you would have to arrange on your own, and you would have to also pay for that. So again, if you can get the booster shot, I would strongly recommend that you do so for the greatest ease of entry and access throughout your time in Greece and also Italy. All right, so with that, I do want to move on to talking about the itinerary itself. Kostas, I'm really excited to hear about this trip. Can you begin by talking to us about what we can expect on our arrival day in Athens?
All right. So first of all, this is one of the best tours right now that Go Ahead has to offer. It's because it really goes to the most important, the most beautiful parts of Greece: Athens, Mykonos, Santorini, and of course it goes to Italy. So for someone who is arriving to Greece, depends if they're coming or if they have booked their own flights or if they have booked the flights through us. So if they have booked the flights through us, there's going to be someone waiting for them at the public area in the airport at a point once they have picked up the luggage where they will come out. It will be either the tour director or it will be another assistant for the airport, or even a driver of the vehicle, and who's picking them up. And then they will go to the hotel. And if it's late, they will be able to check in. Or if it's early, that means that they may have to wait until check-in, which is usually 3 p.m., which gives them enough time to explore Athens a little bit if they want, or just, have a coffee or just relax. If someone is coming on their own and they have booked their own flights, they have to make their own way to the hotel and connect with the tour director there. The best way to get to the hotel would probably be a taxi, which would cost something like 40, 45 euros per ride from the airport to go to Athens. And taxis are easy to find outside of the airport. Now, the only included activity that the whole group will participate on the first day is our welcome briefing, welcome meeting, you might want to call it, / welcome drink. And this is the first chance that the whole group will be together and we'll have a chance to talk about the itinerary, the program, things to be careful of, things to know about Greece and the trip in general, activities and excursions that are going to be available. It's a chance to have a toast to welcome everyone. And then we'll have our first group dinner, which might be either at the hotel or at a restaurant nearby.
Great. Kostas, I'm sorry to interrupt, but can I ask you one quick question here? So, I know that some of our travelers will be arriving to Greece early and may not be arriving on that standard arrival day. If they're meeting the group at the hotel that day, what time should they plan to get to the hotel to be there in time for that welcome briefing and the welcome dinner?
It's a little bit difficult to tell you exactly what time the tour director is going to be at the hotel, because that has to do with the flights of those who are arriving with go-ahead flights in Athens. But I would say that the welcome briefing usually is going to be something after 4 p.m. And the tour director also informs the reception that this welcome meeting is going to take place. So even if the tour director is not present at the reception, if someone arrives, or if they've been, let's say, to the hotel a couple of days before, they can always ask the reception about where to meet the group for the welcome briefing. It's very common for us to meet someone for the first time at the welcome briefing because they just arrived at the hotel a few hours earlier and the reception informed them about the location. But I would say around 4 p.m. would be a good time to make sure that they are back at the hotel, so they can be in time for a welcome briefing, which can be probably between 4 to 5 to 6, even later, but it can be different in every tour.
Great, thank you. I apologize for the interruption. Now let's move on and talk about the day with the sightseeing tour of Athens.
All right. So on the first day of Athens, we'll have also our first included activity, which is the tour of Athens with the Acropolis. Usually it starts early in the morning. We'll try to usually beat the crowds and the heat. So usually it starts around between 8 to 9 o'clock. And this tour has two parts. One is on the bus, which is a bus tour around the historical center of Athens to see the main buildings and monuments of the city on the bus. We do have a chance to get off briefly to the stadium where the first Olympic Games of 1896 took place. And then the bus part of the excursion ends and we visit the Acropolis Hill, which is one of the highest points of Athens. And we visit the magnificent monument, which is the Parthenon, the symbol of Greece, which is an extraordinary place to visit. It does require uphill walking on slippery 2,500 years old marble. So comfortable shoes are always recommended. If someone has walking difficulties, it's something that can be done also on a slower pace, as long as the tour director knows about someone's abilities. And this excursion usually will end around noon, 12:30, which at the end will be a good enough time to have also lunch and also to do some quick maybe shopping at the old part of Athens, which is called Plaka, which is the most beautiful part of the city. In the afternoon, one might decide to explore Athens on their own, but also we have a very, very interesting excursion, which is a Greek cooking class, which is one of the things that Greece is famous, Greek cuisine especially, Mediterranean cuisine, as we also call it. And during this optional cooking class, we'll have a chance to cook ourselves using all local ingredients of very popular Greek dishes like the Greek salad, the tzatziki dressing with yogurt and garlic, or the souvlaki with the skewered meat, moussaka, and many other Greek dishes. And at the end, we actually eat the food that we prepared ourselves as a group. So it's a really interactive excursion and a really interesting activity to participate in. Now, this is the evening also we have to pack because the next day we're leaving Athens and we're starting our trip in the Greek islands. Now, on the next day, our first stop is going to be the island of Mykonos, which is the most cosmopolitan island of Greece, let's say. I have to mention that it's going to be usually an early departure. And by early, I mean even around 7:30 in the morning. There is a reason we're departing early, is because we only have 2 days in Mykonos and also 2 days in Santorini. So we want to make the most of our time in the islands. So we'll have a little bit of early departure, but it's the most efficient way to travel that we're using. We're using a high-speed boat, which takes a bit less than 3 hours, which all in all is less time than flying to Mykonos. So this gives us a chance to arrive early enough in Mykonos to experience it in the morning when the crowds have not showed up yet. So what we usually do is we arrive in Mykonos. We don't go to the hotel straight away, or we might pop by to drop the luggage off. The rooms will not be ready that early. We go to Mykonos town. We go on a little casual, easy orientation walk. We'll have a chance to see some of the landmarks of Mykonos, like the windmills, an area called Little Venice, the main old port, the little alleys, which are, trademark of the island. A lunch break, and then we go to the hotel to check in. And we also have the afternoon free. And then we'll have an included dinner, which can be either at the hotel or in a nearby restaurant or in Mykonos town. That depends on the hotel that we're using on that island. The next day, it's a full day in Mykonos, which can be as relaxing as you want or as adventurous as you want. So someone might choose to spend all the time in the swimming pool at the hotel or enjoy and visit some of the beaches of the island. We do have, however, an excursion, which is one of the most popular things to do in Mykonos, but also in Greece in general, which is a visit to the archaeological site of Delos. And the archaeological site of Delos is practically an island, a small island next to Mykonos, which is probably the only archaeological site in Greece which has been untouched for the last 2,500 years, since it was abandoned. It was the religious center of ancient Greece. At one point, it was the most important port of the Mediterranean Sea. It was destroyed, as I mentioned, 2,500 years ago. And since then, nobody has lived in the island. That means that there's no modern construction in the island. No shops, no hotels, no restaurants, no houses, only just a couple of buildings for the archaeologists, and nothing else. Just an ancient city which stepping on it is like going back in time, because you do see the details of everyday life of the ancient Greeks. It's a magnificent experience. It's like a surreal experience in a way, because you feel that you're actually there in antiquity, and you do visit things which are important, like temples and theaters, but also everyday houses, shops that have remained. It's an amazing historical excursion. However, for the logistic of the excursion, it does require to take a bus from your hotel on that morning, early at around 8, 9 o'clock, to go to the port and pick up a little ferry boat, which takes 30 to 40 minutes to go to Delos. This excursion lasts for a good 4 hours, which means it might be a little bit strenuous, so we have to be prepared to walk a little bit longer in uneven spaces and walkways. And let me mention that since it's not an island which has a lot of activity, there are no modern buildings that provide shade or even trees. So it does get rather hot in the summertime. So hats will be necessary, sunscreen, and bottles of water, because there's not even a modern cafeteria in the island at the moment. So it's an excursion which is a bit adventurous, but it's going to be a very, very different experience from the modern and fashionable island of Mykonos to go to something which is an ancient Greek. Now, the evening will be free to explore Mykonos town, which is wonderful to explore in the evening and see the sunset, or at the hotel if someone wants to take it easy. Now, the next day, we're leaving in the morning, not as early, usually around, I want to say 9 o'clock. And we take the same boat we took from Athens to Mykonos, which continues to the next island, which is going to be Santorini. And the next part of the trip is going to be roughly 2.5 hours, which will take us to Santorini around, I want to say 12:30, 1 o'clock, which is also early to check in. Check-in is at 3 o'clock. So what we usually do, we drop the luggage off at the hotel, if possible, if the hotel has space. But we try to make the most of the first gap of time we have until checking in. So usually the tour director might give an orientation walk of Fira, which is the capital of the island, or Kamari, which is one of the black sand beach resort towns we have in Santorini, or another traditional village, depending on where the hotel is located, just to see something more and something interesting on our first stop in Santorini. We'll do the check-in process. So afterwards, everyone has a chance to rest. And there's so much to do in Santorini. So I'm going to be mentioning a lot of them. One of the things you can do in Santorini, or the first afternoon or evening, is of course to join our optional wine tasting tour. Santorini being a unique location in Greece, it's the only active volcano in Greece, one of the few active volcanoes in the Mediterranean Sea. And the local production regarding agriculture is affected by the presence of the volcano. So the quality of the local products is exceptional, but the quantity is very low. So usually you can try local products all in Santorini. The wine of Santorini is worldwide famous. It's one of the best wines in the world. That's why we offer a chance to visit one of the best local wineries, try some of the local wines, and also try some little appetizers, each one assigned to the type of wine we will be trying. So it's a wonderful excursion to be a bit more immersed in the culture and the local production of the island, and gives us a chance also to go on a beautiful ride and visit this winery in the heart of the island. Now, the next day is going to be probably the busiest day in Santorini. We'll try to do, as I said, as much as we can. So in the morning, we'll have a tour, which is going to be, I can almost promise you, although I never promise, but I can almost promise you that it's going to be the biggest surprise of the whole trip, because the second part of this excursion is something that most people know nothing about. The first part of this excursion is to take us on the highest mountain of the island, called Prophet Elijah, for a magnificent view of the island. Then we visit one of the local villages, usually a village called Pyrgos, which is one of the best preserved and traditional villages in the island. And then we visit an archaeological site, which is basically an ancient city that was destroyed by a volcano. It was covered by volcanic ash. It remained buried for thousands of years until it was uncovered 50 years ago. If this rings a bell, if this reminds you of something, Pompeii has a similar story. However, this is a Greek city which is 2,000 years older than Pompeii, dating back 2,000 years BC, roughly. The first civilization that existed in Greece, which was actually very close to the civilization we have nowadays. They lived in modern amenities like running water, even flushing toilets. And this city is extremely well preserved and possible to visit. And it's an amazing archaeological site, which people always feel thrilled having the chance to visit it. So we'll do that in the morning. Then we have a little bit of free time. And I'm saying you could have also the afternoon free, but you probably don't want to, because in that afternoon, we have the best selling and the best rated go-ahead excursion in Europe, I think, which is the Caldera cruise, which is basically a chance to do what most people dream about, a cruise on the Greek islands. And this particular cruise is actually a cruise in the caldera, the underwater crater of the active volcano, which is Santorini. It's a magnificent experience. You go on a catamaran boat, which takes roughly 60 passengers, and you sail along the caldera, which is, as I said, the crater of the volcano, and you get all the magnificent views of the cliffside, like the one you see on the picture, the red cliff you see. You have a chance to sail along the beautiful cliffside to get the most dramatic views of the island. You have a chance to drop by two small islands in the heart of the caldera, which are basically the tops of the volcano itself. You have a chance to actually jump in the water in the Aegean Sea and swim at one point in an area where there are thermal springs coming out of the volcano. You will smell the sulfur. You will hopefully be lucky to feel the warmer water, which is a chance. I don't know if it will ever show up in anyone's life to swim in an active volcano. It's a magnificent experience. It's incredible. It's also a chance to sail outside of the caldera to visit a more remote part of the island where we have the famous red beach and the famous white beach due to the color of the cliffs there. And we also have a chance to go swimming, not at the beach itself, but in front of them, just in front of the catamaran boat. And during that experience, also we have a chance to eat a traditional Greek barbecue of souvlaki, skewered meat, which is prepared on the spot for us, to have a Greek dinner with salads and various appetizers. Lots of music, people dance all the time, unlimited free local white wine, which always, helps enjoy the experience even more. And weather permitting, of course, you will have a chance to see one of the most beautiful sunsets you will see in your lives, the sunset of Santorini, before disembarking and going back to the island to return to the hotel. So that's an excursion for me, it's one of the most magnificent things you can do in the island. It is weather dependent, but during that time of the year, I want to say with great certainty that we don't have problems with that. It can be a bit choppy sometimes, but nothing that can make someone feel uncomfortable. And the next day is the day we are heading back to Athens, but we haven't done everything in Santorini. We haven't done the most famous thing. We haven't seen the most famous thing in Santorini, which is what you've seen pictures of. Every pictures you've seen of Santorini or of Greece even, most probably they included the white churches with the blue domes, all right? So this particular spot with the blue domes and the white chapels, white churches, is a town called Ia. And Ia is a separate town which is located at the edge of the island of Santorini. This is an activity that we don't actually include in our programs because we cannot promise that it's always feasible to get there. It's a very small town, and crowds and weather even and traffic and local holidays might make it impossible to visit it. If we put it on our scheduled itinerary, we cannot really disappoint everyone without going somewhere where it has been promised. However, I can personally tell you with 99% certainty that there's always a little gap in the itinerary to visit Ia. It's just that the tour director will try to find the best time to go there. Ia is the name of the village I just mentioned. And this visit might be the day of departure for Santorini before getting on the flight to Athens. It could be, however, that it might be necessary to go on your first day in Santorini. If there are 10 cruise ships in Santorini the next days, your tour director will not take you to Ia with 10 cruise ships because that will mean that you will not be able to even approach Ia due to the volume of the buses and the crowds. So your tour director will always try to find the best empty few hours you can have in your limited time in Santorini to visit Ia, and you will be able to do it as an extra excursion. The cost is relatively low, something like 20-25 euros. There is, I'm going to be honest with everyone, that there is a small possibility that it might be not available, but I can tell you that every tour director will move earth and sky and will do everything they can to make it available at some point during the tour. So I'm going to say with 99% certainty, there is this extra activity in Santorini to the village of Ia with the blue domes and white churches. It's that the tour director will never be able to tell you exactly the date that is taking place until a couple of days before getting there. And talking about Santorini in general, especially for Santorini, but also Mykonos, being the two most important and most popular islands we have in Greece, I just want to prepare everyone that they do get overcrowded. That means that sometimes our activities may be impacted by the presence of thousands of other visitors. So that means that sometimes as tour directors, we might decide to shuffle around our schedule to make it in the most enjoyable way for everyone. So sometimes we might move a guided tour in Santorini for a previous day or the next day to avoid the crowds. And we always try to do that in order to give the best service and the best experience to our groups. But that's why also I like to mention that because activities in the islands, and later on in Rome, but in the islands, let's start with that, sometimes they might shuffle. It's always not a good idea to book different excursion from private vendors in the islands, because there is a very good possibility they might conflict with the reshuffled program you will be doing in the islands. And that might mean you might have to sacrifice one of the go-ahead activities that you should not probably sacrifice, or you might have to cancel your privately booked excursions because, again, they conflict with our excursions. So that was a bit long, I apologize. So we're getting on the flight to Athens. Usually it's a mid-afternoon flight, which means that you will get to Athens in the late afternoon. And this is probably the time you might be needing a COVID test if you're finishing the tour then. And after that, we have our farewell dinner, which usually takes place either at the hotel or in a restaurant nearby. Now, the next day is the time that, unfortunately, it's the end of the tour for those who have not booked the excursion. For those, however, who have committed a few more days, you have a chance to visit the most fascinating cities in the whole world. A city that has been inhabited continuously for the last 4,000 years, Rome. And there's so much to see in Rome and so many activities that I will briefly mention what we do, and what you could do also on your own. So on the first day in Rome, you will be having probably an early flight. Early means it can be from 8 a.m. until 11, 12 p.m. Sometimes in peak season, it can be later. It's something we don't have any control of. But let's say you will be arriving in the late morning in Rome. That means most probably you'll be there again before checking times, but that gives you more time to explore. Our hotel is centrally located, so the historical center is easily accessible from the hotel you will be found. And in the afternoon, you have a chance to explore the city on your own, following, of course, your tour director's many suggestions. But you might want to participate in one optional excursion, which is actually a new one for this season. And I must say it's very intriguing because it gives you a chance to visit a relatively off the beaten track part of Rome and a very traditional part, an area called Trastevere, which is basically where all the Romans go out for lunch and dinner. It's a location which is very near the center, but it's a little bit out of the way. It's on the other side of the river, and it's full of the best restaurants, the best bars, cafeterias, and a few shops. And many tourists don't make it all the way there. They stick to the touristic part of the town. And it's a shame because it's a wonderful area, and we do have a guided food walk, which means a local specialist, a local guide, will give you a walk on the traditional neighborhoods of Trastevere, which are beautiful, and you have a chance to try different things like a gelato, maybe an aperitivo, a drink, a pasta, or a piece of pastry, different flavors of the neighborhood. And it's a really wonderful excursion, and it brings you closer to how the people live in Rome. Now, the next day, we usually have the tour of the Colosseum and of the Roman Forum. The Colosseum, of course, is an iconic building, one of the symbols of Italy, where the gladiator games used to take place. You have a chance to visit the Colosseum with a local guide. You get in the interior, obviously. You have a chance to see the stage, to see the sitting areas. It's more impressive in person than photos, as you can see, do it justice. But also you visit the Roman Forum, the political and religious center of ancient Rome, and a vast archaeological site. So that's why we offer a quick walkthrough, which is not extremely strenuous because it can be spending too much time there, but we do offer the chance to visit the best parts of the forum as part of our included morning tour. Now, in the afternoon, we have an optional excursion that takes you further away from the center. The historical center of Rome is the most popular one for visitors, but if you step out of the city walls, you can visit some unique places, like the place where the first Christians buried their dead. they were not allowed, nobody was allowed to bury the dead within the city walls. So the first Christians, being too poor to buy property on land, they instead bought small lots of land and they started digging underground tunnels. And this is where they started burying their dead for hundreds of years. Some of the first martyrs, some of the first saints, some of the first popes have been buried in these very long tunnels, which have many layers above and below. And it's an extraordinary site to visit. It's an excursion which is spiritual almost in a way, not recommended for claustrophobics because it's enclosed. But even if you're claustrophobic, you can still enjoy this excursion because it takes you to one of the four most beautiful churches of Rome, the Church of St. Paul, outside of the city walls. So it's a religious themed excursion, but also an off the beaten track excursion yet again. And it's a really, really interesting one that you can do on your as part of an optional go ahead excursion on that day. And finally, the next day, we have our visit to the Vatican. This is one of our flagship of optional excursions that Go Ahead offers. It's a must. It's a chance to visit, first of all, a different country within Italy. The Vatican is its own country, but also to visit the seat of the Catholic Church, probably the greatest museum in the whole world. This excursion will take you in the morning, relatively early at around 8 o'clock, to visit the Vatican museums, to visit the Sistine Chapel, buried by Michelangelo, but also, as part of the excursion, to visit the greatest church in Christendom, the Catholic Church of Saint Peter. I apologize, which is one of the most extraordinary sights you could see. You could see the famous statue of Michelangelo of Pietà, of the Virgin Mary carrying Christ in her hands, and it's an amazing excursion and a very, very strong religious experience for someone who is Catholic, but not only. That is a morning excursion. You have the afternoon free, but on that particular day, on the last day, you probably will have your COVID test, if required, to go back home, and then also a farewell drink as a last chance to have a last toast with the other travelers from your group. Let me also mention that Rome as a city is very fluid, and the order of the sites and the tours I've mentioned very often changes. If, for instance, the Vatican tour falls on a Sunday when it's closed, the Vatican is going to take place the day before, and the Colosseum is going to take place the day after. If for some reason one of the churches like St. Paul outside the city walls is closed, we might move this excursion to a different afternoon, and the same goes for the food walk of Trastevere. So we do have an official order of those activities, but very often we have to adjust it to make sure that everything takes place. And that's pretty much it. I think
Thank you, Kostas.
Everything.
That was so informative, and I have to tell you that we've done a couple of these before, but I love hearing you talk about these sites, especially things like unexpected places like Akrotiri. I mean, what wonderful gems we have on this tour. I did see a number of questions come in, and I know my colleagues have been working hard to answer some of them. There's a few that I'm going to take now before we move on to our next section, but sit tight. If we haven't gotten to them, we will get to them in the Q&A section, or my colleagues will answer you directly. But one question that I had was, or that came in, was about the ferries, and it was asking if people ever get seasick on the ferries. Can you talk about that, and if you recommend that people bring seasickness pills with them?
Let me start with that yes, I would strongly recommend bringing seasickness pills because there's a lot of traveling on this trip. We have airplanes, we have buses, we have high-speed boats, we have catamarans, we have little ferry boats in Delos. There is even a cable car and donkeys in Santorini that you might want to use in your free time. So yes, bring them just in case. But let me mention about the boats that what we mainly use throughout the season are what we call high-speed boats, but I can tell you that not exactly what you have in mind. Those high-speed boats are rather large. They can take, I would say, 600 to 800 passengers, and they can take vehicles, cars, and some trucks even underneath. So they're pretty big. So they don't move so much, meaning the trip is rather steady. However, it can get windy. And the Greek islands are windy places. It can get a little bit rough, but nothing really. I have rarely seen really rough seas, to be honest. And I've never had someone getting seriously sick unless someone has never traveled on a boat before. But even still, usually it's a very smooth sailing. However, there is always a chance it might be a little bit bumpy. Just for safety is concerned, if the seas are very rough, the Greek port authorities do not allow high-speed boats to sail because it's not safe. So in this case, we will not be jeopardizing our lives going on an unsafe modes of transportation. And another way of transport will be found, like a slower ferry boat, which can be, less bumpy, or a flight, or we might shuffle around our itinerary. But as I said, those boats are bigger than you probably are prepared for, and they're more smooth and more pleasurable than someone might expect from a high-speed boat.
Great, that's very helpful. Kostas, I did see two questions come in as you were speaking about Mykonos, and you were talking about how after we arrive, there'll be a sort of orientation of the island. And the questions that came in, there's two questions. One of them was, is the arrival tour on bus or walking? Can you talk about what you would expect upon your arrival in Mykonos?
Yes. So keep in mind that this particular tour is not a typical bus tour around Europe that you hop on the bus, get off, take pictures, get on the bus again. In the islands, the use of the bus is minimal. Everything else is done by foot, unless it's an excursion optional or included. In this particular case, the orientation walk would be to Mykonos town. In Mykonos town, just to explain that the average road is this wide. Okay, you can see my hand. So literally, it can only be done by foot, but that's a fun part of Mykonos town. So what we do, because you need the bus to go to town, hotels are not in town, hotels are usually further out or in other parts of the island. So we go with a hotel and we just get off. There is a part that has to be done as a group for 10 minutes just to reach the main square, and it's flat. And then tour directors, we offer an orientation walk, which can last even 45 minutes to an hour, but it's a very short distance. It's just that we stop and point out many things, but it's not even a mandatory one for someone who has walking difficulties, or he's too tired, or they're too tired. They might decide to, sit it out and wait for the group to come back, because the group will be coming back at the same place. So basically, it's all done by foot, but at any moment, if someone is tired, they will be able to either wait for the group, or usually, especially for Mykonos, they will already know, because the tour director will show them, the way to go to the hotel on their own. Because usually there is public transport or some shuttle buses or even taxis. So if someone feels exhausted, they might choose to go on their own, or they might choose to skip the orientation walk altogether and stay at the hotel from the beginning of the day, even if it's early and they cannot check in that early. And they can have a drink by the swimming pool or have a snack at the hotel and wait for check-in time to arrive. But it's a very casual, very pleasurable, and very informative and fun orientation walk that is done by foot.
Great. Thank you for the clarification about that. So I do see that we have a lot of questions and more coming in. So thank you for submitting those to us. Before we move on to our next section, which will answer actually a lot of your questions, I do want to ask a few questions about the Caldera cruise, because we had a couple of those and I thought it might be helpful to talk about that. One question here was, is there snorkel equipment that's available on the Caldera cruise?
I don't know how to answer that, because it has to do with the new world we're living right now. Before COVID, yes, there were snorkels which were being provided to the guests, to the passengers, that they could use them to dive in the water. Last year, because we haven't started the cruises yet, last year, they were not allowed to provide those masks due to COVID. So in theory, if restrictions lessen up, they might be available, but I cannot promise you. Most probably, I want to say that they might not be available for health reasons.
Sure.
However, if you inform your tour director early enough, I'm sure the tour director can direct you to a place where you can buy an inexpensive snorkel that you can take with you on the Caldera cruise. Let me give you my honest opinion, though. The water on the Caldera, while you're going swimming, is the deepest part of the Mediterranean Sea. So snorkeling means basically you will be swimming in the surface of the water without being able to see just the blue, beautiful blue waters of the Aegean Sea. But you don't expect to see colorful fish or rocks or corals because they're not there. It's just
It's too deep.
Huh?
The water is too deep.
The water is too deep, exactly.
So one more question here. Someone asked, do they have life vests available for use on the Caldera cruise? Because this traveler says, I cannot swim, but I love to snorkel using a life vest.
Well, yes and no. So life vests are present on the boat, but they're only used in case of an emergency. And actually, participants who want to swim are actually asked if they can swim. And if someone cannot swim or they have doubts about their swimming abilities, they're asked to stay out of the water. There's no trained lifeguard. The crew is trained to act in a case of an emergency. But if someone, because again, this is extremely deep water, and the only way to go in the water is either to jump in or basically to sit on the side of the boat and just slide down. And you need to be a good swimmer. So someone who's not a good swimmer or doesn't know how to swim, they would not be having a chance to go swimming, even with a life jacket. If they would bring their own life jacket, they would not, and they should not also.
Thank you. That's a very helpful answer there. So wonderful. So with that, Kostas, I do want to move on and talk about some other items here. And I did see that there are some questions in there right now that we are going to be answering with some of these upcoming sections. So the first thing I want to talk about is how to meet the group once you arrive. So if you have purchased your flight package with Go Ahead Tours and you're scheduled to arrive on the standard arrival day, the great news is we're already planning to meet you at the airport. If you are arriving on the standard arrival day and you've purchased your own flights, we can also arrange transfers for you, but we do ask that you give us a call so we can talk about when you're arriving and talk about pricing for that. If you are arriving a few days early, unfortunately, we only arrange transfers for folks on the standard arrival day for the tour. But let's talk about what the process looks like if you do have transfers with us through by buying your flight package with us, or if you've arranged them separately. So what you're going to do once you arrive is, of course, leave the airplane and go through the customs and immigration process. Now, one thing that I think is important to mention about your arrival in Greece is that once you collect your baggage in the baggage claim area, you do have to proceed from there into the public arrivals hall. In Greece, our representatives aren't able to enter the baggage claim area. That's a restricted space. So you do have to proceed from there into the public arrivals hall. And then what you will find is that in that arrivals hall, you will find a representative with a green go ahead sign waiting to meet you and arrange your transportation to your hotel. Now, if you don't see our representative immediately, please be patient. So oftentimes they'll have met someone just before you arrived, and so they may be getting them to the transportation. So that is something that I would say is be patient, stay put, and we will meet you there. Another thing that you can do that is very helpful for the folks meeting you upon arrival is before you depart, we're going to send you a package in the mail that will have green luggage tags and a name tag for tour. And so if you can have those luggage tags on your bag or even wear that name tag when you're entering the arrivals hall, our folks there are going to be looking for green anywhere in that crowd. So if they see that green on your bag, then they'll come up to you, and it just makes it easier for folks to get connected. And from there, usually what we try to do is to group together folks that have arrived within about an hour of each other and then get them all on the same transport to the hotel. So with that, I also want to talk to you about some other tips. Let's talk a little bit about your departure. So as you're getting ready for departure, we recommend that you check in online with your airline about 24 hours in advance. Also, seating is at the discretion of the airline. So when you get your airline information from us about 30 days prior to your departure, you can then use that to log in online with your airline or give them a call to adjust your seating assignments. I would also recommend to double and triple check that you have all of your travel documents before you leave the house and depart early. I would say give yourself at least 2 hours at the airport, maybe more. I'm pretty cautious about these things, so I would say the more time, the better. I'd rather have you sitting there kicking your heels for a little bit before your flight departs than be rushed at your departure. Kostas, we were talking before the meeting began, and I wanted to sort of bring you in here to talk about weather. So, the folks that are on this call, they're traveling in June, July, and August. Throughout the summer, it can start to get pretty warm in Greece. Isn't that right?
Well, that would be an understatement. It can get from warm to extremely hot. So yes, it's a good idea to be prepared for this type of weather.
Great, yeah. So sun protection is a must, right?
I want to say hats and sunscreen are definitely going to be necessary. And even bringing a bottle of water to rehydrate yourself. So when you are outdoors, might help also. It can be rather hot, especially in the months of July and August. So light colored clothing can help, reflect the sun. It's good. Shorts, flip-flops can help, but don't forget that getting sunburn can happen very easy. So maybe something to cover in this case from intense sun, or an umbrella might even help sometimes. But don't forget also that the islands do get rather windy, and sometimes in the evening it can get chilly, or sometimes in their plane or the high-speed boats, the air conditioning might be very strong. So no matter if you're traveling in the heart of July, I would probably recommend bringing something like a light jacket with you, and just to have it in case it's necessary.
Great, that's really helpful. And I have a few more packing tips to add as well. My recommendation is to pack as light as you can, especially because on this trip you do have multiple modes of transport. You got ferries, you've got flights. I would say please limit yourself to one checked bag per person, just to make sure that you're traveling light. And one thing that I would also bear in mind is that when you are boarding the ferries don't have porterage service, so you will be wheeling your luggage onto the ferry yourself. So please bear that in mind when you are packing, and pack as light as possible. I would also recommend to bring masks and hand sanitizer. With masks, I would say bring at least a few of the KN95 masks with you, especially if you're going to Italy, because these will be required in certain locations there. But I would say in general, it's a good idea to have these masks with you. As far as medication, I have two tips for bringing medication on tour. One of them is to pack it in your carry-on bag, so you have it with you on the plane. If your luggage is delayed, you don't want to be without your medication. The other is to bring extra medication. So in the event that you do have to quarantine, you want to make sure that you have enough medication to see you through that period. Now, Kostas was talking about this, but I think it bears repeating that protection from the sun is really important. So wide-brimmed hats are really helpful, especially in places like Delos, where, it's an archaeological site and there really isn't much shade to be found there, but also things like sunscreen. Sometimes people will bring, good lightweight long sleeves to protect themselves from the sun in that way. So bear that in mind as you're packing for tour. I would also say good walking shoes. So, there are going to be times on this tour when you're going to be on uneven surfaces like archaeological sites. And so good, comfortable walking shoes are important. Light jackets for the evenings, as Kostas mentioned. I think also for times when you are on flights or in ferries, it might be a little bit cool with the air conditioning there. Now, the bathing suit, I think, is important to bring, but Kostas, you had a recommendation to bring ones that are dark in color. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes. Now, during the catamaran cruise, there will be 3 chances to go swimming, usually. And one of them is where the thermal springs of the volcano come out. And if someone chooses to swim there, they will be able to smell the sulfur from the volcano. It's quite an interesting experience. However, this sulfur can stain light-colored swimsuits. So something white can become yellow, or something yellow might become brown. So I would not recommend bringing very fragile and light-colored swimsuits. And for this particular case, also they will remind you on the boat, no jewelry should be worn while jumping in that particular swimming opportunity, because again, jewelry reacts strangely with sulfur.
Great. That is really helpful. So if you did want to bring a light colored bathing suit, might bring a second one for that Caldera cruise that's dark in color. Kostas, I did see a couple of questions in here about laundry. People were asking if there would be facilities available for laundry during the course of this tour. Can you talk about what may be available in that regard?
Well, in this particular tour, it's a bit of it's a short tour, so traveling is rather fast. So laundry can be quite time consuming, I must say. Now, most the hotels, I apologize, most the hotels actually have a laundry service, which is a little bit pricey, I'm going to say. And some of them might be even only dry cleaning. Since this is a short tour, what I usually recommend is if something you can actually hand wash yourself and let it to dry outside of your room, in a couple of hours, it will be dry. In the summer heat, it's going to be as good as new. So that's actually will save you the hassle, because actual laundromats, laundry places, they're very few. I don't think there is actually one in Mykonos, but maybe there is one in Santorini, and they're actually hard to get to. And again, time is of concern because you have so much to do in the islands. So you might not bother yourselves with the idea of laundry, especially if you just do the 7-day tour in the Greek islands. I usually myself bring something for every day, and I don't need to do laundry. But otherwise, as I said, you might want to just buy some soap and do it yourselves. Otherwise, as I said, there will be a possibility, but it might be costly and it might not be available. Something that I also mentioned to some of my groups, whenever we are actually in Athens, in a hotel in Athens, and when we go to the islands, we actually get to come back at the same hotel. This is not always the case. Sometimes we'll come back to a different hotel. But for groups, that it can happen that you start at the same hotel from the hotel you're staying in the end. Some people might want to leave the heavy suitcase back in Athens and just bring a smaller carry-on to the islands and just do laundry for maybe one day. In this case, they don't have to carry the heavy suitcase through the ferry boats, and they can do a lot of shopping in the islands without worrying about the weight on the flight from Santorini back to Athens.
Great. Kostas, I did see a few questions come in that I thought maybe we could talk about now, just because we are talking about packing. One question is about clothing for entering religious sites. This question says, what is acceptable for women to wear at religious sites? And then she says, I like to wear shorts too. Can you talk about what expectations might be had for women entering religious sites?
Now, on the main part of the tour, so just the Greek islands, you would hardly have any issues wearing anything you wish. The only time you might go to a religious place might be on your free time, if you would like to go inside a Greek church. In this case, if it's in the islands, even shorts might be allowed. Depends on if the priest is in the church at the moment or if he's not. And usually they're not. But so you might want to bring something to cover your knees to go in a Greek church in your free time. But for the islands, it might not be necessary. For Athens, they're a bit more conservative, let's say, if you go in a church on your free time. And that's only for knees. No other, head doesn't have to be covered, shoulders is fine also. Now for Italy, it's more strict. So for the Vatican and also for the catacombs at excursion and the Church of St. Paul, knees and shoulders have to be covered, both for men and women. So something longer than the knee, shoulders have to be covered, and that's the only restrictions we have. Heads can be uncovered without a problem.
Yeah, and one thing that I've heard as a tip from other travelers is, when you're walking around Rome, you often stumble upon these churches and you can just walk right into them. But you do want to be respectful, and so some folks will carry like a sarong or a shawl with them to put around their waist and cover their knees and then cover their shoulders. So you can carry light wraps with you that you could throw on if you did want to pop into one of those places. And one other question about clothing before we move on was, is there any kind of dress code for included dinners? I would say our tours are fairly casual affair. And so, Kostas, would you talk about, how folks typically dress when they're on tour with you when they go out to the group dinners?
Well, this tour is a pretty casual tour, so you will not be required to wear a tie or to be extremely casual, extremely formal during an evening. But it also depends. Some, let's say, even some hotels have fancier restaurants than others, or some restaurants might be a little bit more fancy without actually having a dress code. It's actually a good idea to always talk to the director. But I would recommend you might want to bring one fancy set of clothes if you want to go out in the islands. Like Mykonos is a fancy place. If you want to go out in the evening to have a cocktail in little Venice, enjoying the sunset, you might want to wear something nicer because you will be seeing people dressed to the nines in the islands. So you might want to bring just one set of clothes. But to be honest, even for our included dinners, it's pretty relaxed as long as we follow common rules like no shorts in a restaurant for dinner. I think that would be acceptable. There is a very particular dress code, however, I would like to mention for the catamaran cruise we do on the boat, that shoes are not allowed. It's a catamaran boat, which means that no regular shoes are allowed to be worn. So everyone needs to be barefoot. Your foot will be kept safe during the trip, and we will be retrieving them at the end of the trip. So we will be either barefoot, or you can bring an extra pair of socks to wear during the Caldera cruise. So that's the only dress code I can think of.
Great. So I do want to move on here and talk about electrical adapters. We have this on our packing list, but I also do want to just talk briefly about the type of socket that we have here in Greece and Italy is what we call the standard European socket. If you're looking for adapters online, it might also be called Type C. But one thing I do want to mention to you is that when you are purchasing adapters, is that some of the more affordable options will change the shape of your plug, but it won't necessarily change the voltage entering your device. So you do want to be careful about the devices you bring. Some of them will operate on 220 volts as they have in Greece, like your cell phones, for example. Those are usually fine. But there are some devices that you will need to have a voltage converter as well as the plug adapter. So you can often buy these as one set. So it's like a voltage converter and adapter in one. And that would be necessary for something like a CPAP machine, for example, or a hair dryer. Although, to be honest, hair dryers have been the culprits of many mishaps on tour. And so I would say leave your hair dryer at home because the hotels will have them, and you can just use those there, and you can avoid the risk of blowing out your hair dryer. I did see some questions that we had about money on tour, and I have a few recommendations as far as how to handle your money when you travel to Greece and Italy. My recommendation is to bring credit cards and to bring ATM cards to withdraw cash. I generally recommend against bringing cash to exchange once you arrive. And the reason I say that is that cash exchange bureaus are becoming harder and harder to find. So you can spend a lot of time trying to find them. And oftentimes you get a pretty bad deal. So my recommendation is to bring ATM cards to withdraw cash from ATMs and to use credit cards. Visa and MasterCard are the most widely accepted ones. So those will be the ones that you'll have the most success with. I also do want to remind you that when you're on tour with us, you will have folks that are working very hard to make sure that you have a great time on tour. And we do recommend that you tip them. Your tour director, we would ask that if possible that you do tip them in euros, but the equivalent of $7 to $10 US per person per day. For your bus driver, the equivalent of $3 US per person per day, and any local guides, the equivalent of $2 US per person per day. I do have a few reminders for you before we open it up for some more questions. I do want to remind you to download our app. As I mentioned before, the Getting Ready tab has a lot of very helpful information, including your entry requirements, but there's also some wonderful features on there to help you out as you prepare for tour and when you're on tour. For one, you can get connected with members of your group. When you have the app, you can see the names of the other folks in your group, and you can communicate with them, as well as use our tour feed where you can post photos and memories of your time on tour. It's also a wonderful way to stay in touch with people once you get home from your trip. We also really care about how your experience is, and we do ask you to fill out an evaluation of your tour. You can fill this out every day throughout the course of your tour, so everything is fresh in your mind. This is really helpful for us here in the States, as well as for your tour directors. They want to make sure that they're giving you the best service possible. The app is available for download in both the Apple App Store as well as the Google Play Store, so both for Apple and Android. I strongly recommend that you download this. There are some really wonderful features in there to help you prepare for tour, but also have a wonderful time on tour. I do want to remind you about our loyalty program. We call it Club Go, and you are already a member. And with Club Go, the more you travel, the more rewards you earn. One thing I do want to make sure that you're aware of is that when you get back from your tour, you will have access to additional discounts. We call this our Welcome Home Credit. And this is an additional credit for you in the first 90 days after you get home from a tour. So if you get home and you're feeling like you need to have another trip to look forward to, give us a call. We'll be happy to help you out. And a few next steps to bear in mind before we get into our questions. Please continue to check your inbox and the app for any updates from us. We're going to be emailing you tomorrow with a link that you can use to watch a recording of this session. And as you get closer to tour, I would say continue to check your entry requirements. Everything we've talked about is true as of today, but it's entirely possible that these regulations may change before the time that you travel. So please continue to check your entry requirements. And when you get closer to your tour, schedule your COVID test in advance so that you can make sure you get the time slot you want. The last thing I want to say to you before we get into our questions is to get excited for this trip. I can't tell you how excited we are. This is shaping up to be a real incredible travel season. Our tour directors and our staff in Greece are so excited to see you, and we are so excited to have you on tour. And our folks that have traveled to Greece in the last months have been sharing some incredible feedback with us. So I think that you're in for a real treat. Kostas, let's get into it. Let's see some questions here. Oh, this is a great question. Will this webinar be archived for future viewing? Yes, absolutely. So this is going to be available to watch on our website. We're going to send you an email tomorrow that will have a link to that page. Oh, Kostas, this is an interesting question. Before you were talking about the Caldera cruise, and you were mentioning how there's a volcano. This is, you're visiting the site of the volcano. The question was, how do we get to the volcano? And you'll be going over it on the boat, correct?
That's true. That's true. It is an active volcano, not, however, a volcano that gives you a chance to see the lava flowing. So you will not be seeing that. Now, what we call nowadays the volcano are two small islands. You can actually see them just above the word questions. They're two little islands. Those are what we call the peak of the volcanoes nowadays. You don't get to step on them, but during the Caldera cruise, we sail usually through them, and this is where you go on one of your swimming stops, and this is where the thermal springs I mentioned earlier are located. It is actually, in theory, possible for someone to visit those islands on foot by booking a separate excursion from the island. But it's an extremely strenuous and quite, adventurous activity that we don't really promote to our groups for matters of safety. But otherwise, you will be seeing those two islands, which we call the volcanoes. But practically, where you see the water in this picture, just imagine that underneath, this is a crater, which is full of water, similar to Crater Lake.
Beautiful. Honestly, that Caldera cruise just sounds like such a wonderful time. I get so excited every time I hear about it. Kostas, this is a question. Someone asked, are restrooms plentiful? Can you talk about your approach as a tour director to making sure that people have the opportunity for comfort stops, as we would call them?
Now, let me just mention that in Europe in general, the restrooms are not as easy to find as maybe they are back home. I usually say to my guests that in Europe, space is luxury. So most shops and restaurants and public places would rather use this space for something else than a bathroom, which doesn't bring any money. So right. There is a lack of public restrooms in many places. So there are ways to get around that. One is to always make sure you use a restroom when you find one, in a shop, in a restaurant, a cafeteria, or many places. Your tour directors are aware, we are very well aware of the situation. So we always will mention that, this is a good time to use the restroom, or there is a restroom next to us, or this place is very friendly with people who want to use the restroom. And whenever necessary, we will make adjustments to our trip to provide restroom opportunities. This particular tour doesn't have it, but let's say we want to have a long bus ride, we always build into the ride bathroom stops. in this case, we don't have something of such a long traveling time, but still tour directors will give you opportunities and reminders to use the restrooms when it's best time to use it. If someone has, of course, a serious need to use the restroom, always something can be found. If it's an emergency, that's why the tour director is there to help you find the solution, because we're only human and things can happen. But yeah. So it's not going to be as easy as it is for back home. But you will find that the Greeks are some of the friendliest people in the world, and the Italians almost as much.
Great. So there was a question in here from Daria, and I think she was asking if it was possible to go to a town in Santorini on one's own, and I believe she was talking about Ia. Is it possible for a traveler to go to Ia independently, or would that be somewhat difficult?
It's very, very challenging, I must say, especially on this particular tour, because we're only there for 2 days. So it's something that it can be very time consuming. Someone would have to rely on public transport, which is extremely unreliable and also not, what's the word, enjoyable, because it gets extremely crowded. And this is not an exaggeration, you can have 100 people in one bus and 50 of them are not actually sitting down. It's especially in the summertime, it's a nightmare. There are a few taxi opportunities in the islands, but there are very few of them. So each island, I want to say, has something like 20 or 30 taxis for the whole island. Wow. Which makes them, apart from being pricey, also extremely difficult to rely on. That's why in this particular tour, being only 2 days, we offer the chance to do so many different activities as a group, because we can actually budget our time in the most efficient way, and also in the more inexpensive way, because doing an expedition to Ia on your own, for someone to go on their own, can be a rather costly experience. Some people rent cars, which is dangerous to drive in the cliff sides, but also quite expensive and quite difficult. So in theory, everything is possible. In practical, as a practical way of answering, I would say in 2 days, there are so many more places that will require far less effort to do on your own than going to Ia or to a different place on your own.
Great, thank you for that. Here's a question, and there's a couple parts to this question, and I will try to tackle them one by one. So the question, I'll read them out. So it says, are there any problems or restrictions on the Greece tours due to the current COVID variant? How are the positivity numbers in Greece, and should we expect some closures if the numbers get worse? So the first part is, are there any problems or restrictions on Greece tours due to current COVID variant? So we have talked about what the current regulations are in Greece. So my expectation as of right now is that your travel will be much easier if you're able to show your vaccination status and if you've had a booster shot. Having a booster shot will make everything easier for you as you travel in Greece. And so as to what the current numbers are, and if we should expect closures if the numbers get worse, it's very difficult to say, and I would hate to speculate. But what I would say is that, we have seen over time these things can change, and so I would continue to check your entry requirements as you get closer to your tour. Kostas, I may ask you a sort of a related question. Is, you're in Greece now. As it stands now, are folks talking about reinstating more restrictions, or is the talk more about loosening things, or would you even hate to speculate on that?
Exactly that. It's a speculation, because I can tell you what people talk about and what you hear on the news, but unless they're finalized and officially announced, we don't really know. They are sort of relaxing some of the measures. For instance, even last month, you still had to wear masks outdoors, and they're moving away in this direction. The PLF, the passenger locator form, has been removed as a requirement. So I want to say things are moving in a more positive way, less forceful and less strict. It doesn't mean, however, that we don't have a new Omega variation showing up tomorrow that might change things until the summer. Delta took very, very quickly to take control, and then Omicron also afterwards. So we cannot really say something set in stone, because it's very fluid and things change on a daily basis. So far, it seems to be optimistic. but that's today's news and yesterday's news.
Yeah.
Tomorrow's news might be something different.
We can only talk about what we know today, right? And what we know today is that the best way to prepare for this tour, to have the greatest ease of access to enter Greece and then to go to see all the sites you want to see is to be vaccinated and to have your booster shot. So I would say those are steps that you can take. But, as we get closer, I would encourage you to continue to check your entry requirements to see if any of those things have changed.
If I may add just one thing, is that not having the booster shot, as things are now, I can sort of guarantee, I can sort of predict that it's going to affect someone's touring experience, that it might affect them access to many places. So having the booster shot or the second dose of vaccination in the last few months is going to greatly improve the experience. Not having them, it's going to greatly impact it. So yeah, no matter what the requirements may be.
Yeah. With that, I do want to move on to another question here. This one's about luggage. Any restrictions on luggage size? Kostas, I imagine that you might want to consider the ferry and that flight from Santorini to Athens, right?
Exactly. So the same restrictions will apply for the flight from Santorini to Athens, and also from Athens to Rome if someone does the extension. So basically, the restrictions are a luggage that can travel on a flight. So that's the official restriction. However, don't forget that you will be physically responsible for carrying your luggage through the ports and on the ferry boats, and the high-speed boats and off the high-speed boats. That a heavier, bigger suitcase, it's going to be difficult for someone who brings them. And sometimes due to traffic at the ports, due to large crowds, especially in the summer months, expect to be embarking on a high-speed boat along with another 500 passengers. Imagine doing that with a heavy suitcase. You probably want to do that with a smaller suitcase because you all 500 of you will have less than 10 minutes to get on the same high-speed boat, place your luggage, and move to your sitting area. It's a bit of a hectic process. So the more comfortable you will be carrying your luggage, it's going to be the better for you. So smaller, easier to carry would be best.
Here's a question that I can answer. So the question is, this is about tipping. It says, if we bring American money, is that okay to use, or do we have to exchange it for euros? So what I would say is that your tour director will accept your tip no matter what it is. That they would be grateful for whatever you can have. If possible, it would be preferred to be in the local currency. But if US dollars are what you have left, that's better than not tipping them at all. So I would say, if possible, though, euros would be preferred.
May I just add that for any local tipping in restaurants or any service you receive by local businesses, I would strongly recommend giving euros, because a waiter who gets $2 or $3, for them it doesn't even worth changing them. So for them it might be nothing. But I just want to mention that it's a little bit of an outdated idea to bring dollars thinking that we can use them widely, even in some shops. Even if you read about it on the internet that you can use dollars in some shops, it's never a good idea. You will never get a good deal. So my suggestion is, don't rely on using dollars for many things on tour. I would strongly recommend having euros for anything.
Yeah, there's a related question here. It says, do we need to take euros? If so, can we use it for both Greece and Italy? And so, yes, both Greece and Italy do use the euro. And what I would say is, if you want to, you could exchange some money at home to have euros with you when you arrive to tour. But an alternative to that is you can also bring an ATM card and withdraw cash from ATMs. You need to notify your bank before you travel, of course, but usually you can get a better deal withdrawing cash from ATMs versus bringing cash and exchanging it. And then there was a question here: do most Greek businesses accept credit cards, or is cash recommended? Kostas, are there any businesses that you can think of where it would be where they might not accept credit cards?
Officially, there are very few businesses that do not accept credit cards. Taxis is actually one of them. Unofficially, it is actually going to be very likely, as you will see, that some places might not accept credit cards, either because their credit card machine I'm trying to do quotes here, but I cannot. Their credit card machine is broken that particular day, or they might say, I will give you a better price if you pay by cash. Greece is a cash-oriented economy, so cash will actually speed things up for you. In fact, it might give you a better price, and there might be places that do not accept credit cards. This is nothing to be stressed about, however, because the only thing someone has to do is, before getting or buying anything or sitting down in a restaurant, is to ask if they accept credit cards. And if they say no, there are always many, many more possibilities next door for many other places. So it's not something that you will be stranded somewhere. If someone doesn't accept credit cards, you will not have a chance to eat or buy something. There will be another 10 similar things you can do in the same area that you can do by credit card. But having cash will, as I said, make the experience smoother and faster in many places. And it's recommended to always have some, especially for something smaller that shops are hesitant of selling for a credit card fee, like a couple of bottles of water.
Here's a question. The question says, will we be hiking up many hills? I would say we don't really do hiking, right? But there are some locations here that do have some hills, yes?
So the closest that could be in hiking, but it's not, is the Acropolis Hill, which is exactly as the word says it, it's a hill. So it does require some uphill walking, but it's something that we have built in our itinerary because, first of all, it's inevitable to be allowed entry in the Acropolis, but it's something we do on a very slow speed. Our guides stop and talk, the higher up we go. And it's something that I've seen people of even the most precarious health and walking abilities who have done it. So that would be the closest to hiking I would recommend, but it's not really. And it's a distance of, I want to say 500 feet with an incline of, I don't know, I want to say 30 degrees or something like that. It could be hard to describe.
Yeah.
If someone is extremely walking, let's say, restricted, there are always ways of sort of alerting the tour director that you will not join the rest of the activity. So the tour director can keep an eye on you and can explain to you how to meet up with the group or how to find the best viewpoints for a certain site, even without having to walk all the way to the top. So there's always going to be alternatives and help if required. For the islands, most walking is flat. Santorini does include a little bit of uphill walking due to the architecture, which you can already see in the photo. So we have the cliffside that steps are required, but there's never a race, there's never a rush. The only times you will walk a little bit faster is getting on and getting off the high-speed boats. But in these cases, the terrain will be flat, but you will be carrying your suitcase.
So here's a question about meals. What determines if we have the provided meals at the hotel or at a local restaurant? I know one thing is we often try to have your welcome dinner at the hotel just because it's a lot easier on the day you arrive to not have to be going elsewhere. Can you talk about some other determinations there?
Absolutely. Sometimes it has to do with hotel availability and hotel services. Some hotels do not provide meals to the standard that we prefer for our groups, or to the environment we prefer for our groups, or to the service, because sometimes even speed can be a decisive factor. We don't want our first dinner to be something fast. It's not fast food, it's a casual dinner, but we don't want to be something that's going to last for 5 hours. Everyone has, is coming back from their flight. And also regarding available restaurants in the nearby area or accessible restaurants by bus. So for instance, again, in Athens, it can be in the hotel. If the hotel has a restaurant suitable to our standards. And in the islands, again, it has to do with hotel distance from the place where restaurants are located, hotel food quality, and many, many other factors. So it's literally different in every hotel. So I cannot promise you that in Athens, you'll be having dinner at the hotel, in Mykonos, in town, and Santorini at the hotel, because it always changes. But as I said, those are some of the many factors, and I could give more, but I think that probably should answer it.
So here's a question, and this one I think will vary a little bit, but it says, for typical meals for the week in Greece, how much money in euros is recommended? And I think that, one thing I would say is that, in some of these locations, the some of the restaurants are very high end, so you could range from getting a lunch of souvlaki or something like that to going out for like a very, I don't know, maybe even Michelin starred meal. So it can range, but Kostas, what can you talk a little bit about budgeting for meals on tour?
All right. So first of all, sky's the limit in the islands. So some of the most expensive restaurants in the world are in the Mykonos, Santorini. So I'm not going to give you the higher range, but I can tell you that there are always affordable options. So if someone wants to be on a budget, there are always inexpensive snacks like a gyros sandwich, which is €3.50 if you take it to go. You don't have the dining in experience, but it's a quick snack. Or some places, in most of the islands, there are supermarkets. You can get affordable snacks. Generally, for a lower range, very plain lunch, I would say something like €15, talking about the islands. And I'm going to say that for 30 to 40 euros, let's say 50 with wine, will give you a rather exclusive type of dinner. But basically, I want to say 20 to 30 euros is a minimum to have you're only here for a few days, a pleasurable experience with a good environment. Otherwise, for 15 euros, you can get an affordable snack. It's not such a beautiful area, but a snack that we Greeks would eat and have a good lunch there.
Great. Kostas, this is a question that I'm going to ask it knowing you may not have an answer for it, but the question is, it says, if my husband and I wanted to do professional photos in Greece, do you have a preferred company? They're asking specifically about pictures with those big fabric dresses. I've seen these ones where it's like these big long trails flowing with, the white and blue houses in the background. You look like you may not know.
I first I thought I did, and then I wasn't sure. I'm still not 100% sure about the long fabrics, but I'm assuming you might refer to certain special shots. Or I just realized it can be some of those canopies in some of the hotels. They have this flowing, pieces of fabric basically that sail on the Aegean Sea, on the Aegean Air. We don't have a particular photographer that we work with. It's an information that it doesn't worth investigating online, but it doesn't hurt to talk to your tour director, because organizing an activity like this will definitely sort of impact your activities with the rest of the group. So you might want to talk to your tour director early enough to help you schedule it in the best time possible. But otherwise, we don't have a particular photographer we work with. It's something we can find out if necessary, or you can also find out and compare prices on your own.
Yeah. Kostas, I know that we have gone well over our time, but I wanted to ask one more question that I saw come through, which was these folks said that they're planning to partake in some of the nightlife, which I understand is available in Mykonos for sure. Is that usually accessible within walking distance or fairly nearby from where we stay?
Again, it's hard to answer, because it depends on, and we have many hotels in Mykonos. This year is going to be one of the busiest historically years in Mykonos, and we do have several new hotels we're working with. So I cannot really tell you where the hotel location is going to be. So I can tell you that we don't really have a hotel in Mykonos town, because there are very few, and they are the exclusive hotels with 1,500, 2,000 euros per night rooms. So we're staying usually either further out from the town or in some other parts of the islands. But I cannot promise you the services. Like some hotels might have a 24-hour shuttle bus. Some hotels might have a shuttle bus that can take guests every few hours in the center, but maybe they don't run at midnight. Some hotels might be near public transport, which in the peak season is 24 hours. Some hotels might be a bit more isolated, and in this case, a taxi might be required, and they don't offer a shuttle bus, maybe. So, but taxis are a little bit unreliable. So I cannot really promise you there's going to be easy access to the nightlife. But again, it's only 2 nights, so I'm guessing that maybe one would want to stay out late one of the 2 nights. It's something that with early enough conversation with the tour director, a solution can be found. So let's say, for instance, a hotel might offer a service that you can actually pay a driver to pick you up at a certain time during the night, not as a taxi, but as a, as an extra service. So there's always a way around it, as long as it's planned in advance. And and again, it depends on the hotel location.
Great. That was very helpful. Kostas, I want to thank you for being here with us and taking this extra time to answer all of our questions. I see that we did get a comment in here. Someone had written in, thank you, great presentation. And I want to thank you, our travelers, for being here today to learn a little bit more about this incredible trip that you are going to be traveling on. And so with that, I also want to ask Kostas, do you have any parting words for our travelers as they are getting ready for this trip to Greece?
Well, first of all, I would like to thank you for attending this webinar. I would like to thank you for the wonderful questions. And I would like to just say that I can't wait to see you during the next months. And even if you're actually not on a tour with me, even if you see me on the road, just say hello and say, we saw your webinar, and I would love to chat and see if you actually found it useful. So once again, thank you. It's been a pleasure. And Greece and Italy, we're waiting for you. Very, very excited.
Wonderful. Thank you. And thank you again to our travelers at home. We are so grateful that you have chosen to travel with us and that you have decided to travel to Greece. We cannot wait to meet you on tour and show you all that Greece has to offer. So on behalf of my colleagues here in the States and my colleagues in Greece, including Kostas, I want to say thank you again. We can't wait to see you on tour. So for now, we will say safe travels and we will see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you.